Sure. Oki, Dadanast Ada, Abawatesh, and Bozu. Welcome to the Canadian Rockies Youth Summit. If you're just joining us now, this summit is a 3-day event hosted online. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we're hosting this summit from. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Canmore area known as Chuwap-Chip-Chin Kudebi, translated in Stoney Nakoda as shooting at the willows, and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Iarhe Nakota, comprised of the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, and play, and help us steward this land and honor and celebrate this territory. The Canadian Rockies Youth Network is a coalition of like-minded youth activists dedicated to helping conservation and having their voices heard on environmental issues. With our partner, the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley, we have co-designed and co-organized this network that connects and creates a body of youth that is consulted on land management decisions affecting these shared mountain and foothill spaces. This year, we're hosting this summit. The theme of this year's summit is Turning Hope into Action. We hope that you take the knowledge you gain from this summit and its accompanying workshop series and use it in creating positive action in your community. If you are looking for some ways to take action, head on over to our website at CanadianRockiesYouthNetwork.org or our Instagram at Canadian Rockies Youth Network for info on our Take Action contest, which will show some really small actions you can take in your community that help it and help the environment. Enter for a chance to win some really cool prizes, including a guided hike at the Lake Louise Ski Resort. There will also be some info on action projects, larger action projects, that you can start work on after or during the summit, included in your attendee package. So do it now at Canadian Rockies Youth Network and make a post about why you love the Canadian Rockies and take action. Before we begin our Barely Enough expert panel, we'd like to thank all the speakers, partners, and collaborators who have made this summit possible. The Canadian Rockies Youth Network and Summit is made possible with our partner, the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley, empowering environmental, community-based leadership, as well as a very generous grant from the Calgary Foundation, which is helping to make a healthy and vibrant community where everyone belongs, and a very generous sponsorship from the Assembly of First Nations Alberta Association. We also have had generous support from our partners from the following organizations and initiatives: the Niitsitapi Water Protectors, CPAWS, Rockies Repeat, Alberta Parks, Parks Canada, Wild Outside, Lake Louise Ski Resort, the Town of Banff, the Iarhe Nakota Nations, the Kainai Nation, the Yellowstone to Yukon Initiative, Banff Isn't Disposable, the Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, and the Alexander First Nation, alongside all of you attending today. Now that we've mentioned our sponsors, we're ready to start our panel. They're instantly recognizable. They have massive spade-like claws, long concave snouts, and dangerously sharp teeth. Their shoulders are capped with a massive hump of muscles, and their rough fur has the grizzled texture from which they get their names. Grizzly bears are one of the most iconic species of the Canadian Rockies. Yet there is significantly more to them than the dangerous predator we often picture. As more and more humans enter the Rockies to camp, hike, ski, sightsee, and discover some of the most beautiful spaces in the world, how can we protect our grizzly bears from increasing human impacts? The key to coexistence may lie in places we don't expect. In today's panel, Barely Enough, Human-Bear Coexistence in the Canadian Rockies, we may just find it. Joining us today is Bill Snow, a member of the Stoney Nakoda Nation, Wesley First Nation, and a consultation manager for the Stoney Nakoda Nation. John Pakskowski, a wildlife biologist with Alberta Parks and a longtime friend of the network. Molly Seagal, the creator of the Bear 148 podcast. Sarah Elmaligi, PhD, an interdisciplinary conservation scientist and author of What Bears Teach Us, and also a longtime friend of the network. And Nick DeReuter, the director of the WildSmart program at the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley. This team of experts have been working with grizzly bears for years and have seen firsthand how these magnificent creatures respond to humanity. While these panelists present, I encourage our youth attendees to ask questions in the chat. To ask questions on our Mentimeter poll, which Ben will be posting in the chat. I will send our panelists the top most voted questions, and they'll answer them. So, without further ado, I'll ask Bill Snow to kick this panel off for us.
I'm Ola Stitch. Good day, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you to Lucas and the Canadian Rockies Youth Organization for setting up the panel here today. I've got a presentation that I'll be following here, and we'll just get into it here. Stony Nakota Nation, we took part in a cultural study on grizzly bears in 2015 and 16, completed a report on grizzly bear habitat down in the Kananaskis area. And I won't be giving the full presentation of this report, but I will be giving a portion of it as our time is limited today. If any of you are familiar with the Spray Lakes sort of area down in Kananaskis, just to the east of Spray Lakes, there's a place called Galatea Creek that is along Highway 40, and that's a very important special place for the Stony Nakota people, because our understanding of that area is important for grizzly bears. And this is the area that we focused on in our study. And so just to give you a really quick snapshot of the actual place that we're focusing in on our study. The study is available online at the Canadian Mountain Network, and I will have a link to that report later on in our slides. Our study focused on doing a understanding grizzly bears from a cultural perspective. So it's not a typical Western science report. Some of the recommendations that we focus on are the restricted activity, cultural monitoring, connectivity, cultural awareness, restricted development, and ceremony. The ceremony was very important because important to many different First Nations people. It's how we relate to land. It's how we relate to wildlife. Wildlife isn't just for recreational hunting. We look at wildlife as our brothers and sisters. We have a long-term relationship with wildlife and the habitat that they utilize. So the report talks about trying to bridge that gap between Western science and traditional knowledge. The ceremony that we conducted was held back in 2018. We were able to work with Alpine Club of Canada and conduct our grizzly ceremony. The reason why we chose the Alpine Club was because we wanted to make sure that we had do the ceremony in a culturally important place. Indian Flats, as this place is known, is a popular place that Stony people would come and camp. And so that was the reason why we had chosen the Alpine Club to do our ceremony. Many of you may have seen the grizzly bear, the white grizzly bear from 2020 that was sighted in the Banff National Park. I was honored to learn that people of the Bow Valley named grizzly bear the Nakota. And it's important, I think, to have places like Galatea Creek remain protected, remain wild, remain open and suitable for grizzly bears to stay in, to forage, and to do all of the things that they do on the landscape in those areas. So it's important to protect landscape areas. It's important to protect grizzly bears themselves, and that was the gist of our report, was to ways of protecting grizzly bear habitat and the other recommendations. That's all I had for today. Open to questions, and as I said, the link is there for Canadian Mountain Network if people want to have a look at our study that's available on the website. Ishnish, thank you, and look forward to the questions today.
Oh. Thank you, Ishnish, Bill. Next up, we have John Pekskowski with his presentation on the effects of major events with bears and how they influence policy. So without further ado, John.
Here it's coming.
And just while John pulls up the screen, we just wanted to send a reminder that there is a link to ask whatever questions that you have for the panelists in the Mentimeter. That link is in the chat. And just a reminder to reference whoever you are asking the question to, so whether it's all the panelists or name the panelists you're directing your question to. Thank you very much. Go ahead, John.
Just checking in. You can see my presentation and not my presenter view. Everything's
We see your presenter view, John.
Oh, you do. Shoot.
Press that button at the top.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Let's do that. Better?
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Thanks, John.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks again for having me as part of this. And it's been when we were involved a couple of years ago or last year. Yeah, interesting to see it develop and expand, and a real privilege to be a part of it. And the discussion today about coexistence sort of got me thinking as I sort of put this presentation together. And let's see, okay. And we were talking about coexistence and sort of bringing it down to its simplest form. That means, you know, being in the same place at the same time. But I look at this image and go, well, is this really coexistence, and what does it really mean to me? So it sort of got me thinking that bears are out there on the landscape doing what they do, and they really don't need to coexist with us. It's the humans that sort of need to sort of adapt and be able to live in the bear's world. And you know, we have these interactions that are happening out there all the time, and I'm trying to sort of blend what is actually coexistence when you've got, you know, bears and people, same place, same time, within minutes of each other, and how does that all work, and how can we do that better on this landscape? And I am an ecologist with the government of Alberta, so I'll give you a bit of the government perspective and some of the things we've learned. There is a grizzly bear recovery plan that's just sort of recently been released, but it shows a commitment to trying to sort of manage grizzly bears over the long term and have a good sort of scientific understanding of what's happening. And Alberta's divided into these 7 bear management areas, and we're down here in BMA 5, and that's Kananaskis country. We're up here in Canmore right now. Up here in Canmore right now, but there's a lot going on in this landscape, and between people and bears, and we work a lot in here, and I'll just try and give you a little bit of a perspective. There's Calgary over here, and there's the area we work in. And we know quite a bit about the bears in this area. Over the last 20 years, these are all GPS points, and we sort of understand where the bears are moving on the landscape and how they like to use the landscape. And to better understand them, we've done things like genetic studies to make sure the populations are in good order, and the bears rub on these trees, and we collect samples from those rub trees and get numbers, and it's shown us that the population is pretty stable, which is a good thing if you're trying to maintain coexistence, if you've got a good healthy bear population. And then looking at how these how this level of coexistence has changed over time, and this is from about 15 years ago. We're getting a lot of bears here in the mountains, and in the most recent census we're getting a lot more bears going out into the east, out towards Calgary and Okotoks and places like that, which present other coexistence challenges amongst these bears, who live around here, are pretty habituated in Kananaskis country. They really kind of use that main core area and a lot of the places where the people like to go, and we try and keep them on the landscape as best we can. The problem is when they start moving beyond our little protected area and towards Calgary and the other interface, people aren't as knowledgeable about what coexistence really means. Sorry. Yeah, so is this coexistence? I'm not really sure. It sort of gets us there, but certainly when people or bears cross that line, we sort of have to deal with it because they can get into food, and that changes our management of those bears, and how people behave badly in many cases by leaving attractants and food out for bears really impacts how we have to manage those bears and deal with them. So is this, we're in the same place at the same time, but it's not really coexistence. There's risks involved, and we don't want that. We all want to sort of get along peacefully. And this just shows where we've done sort of action over the last 20 years, where we've had the action bears in Kananaskis country, and almost every bit of road and campground is a place where bears have come to work. And this is what it kind of looks like when we're trying to action bears. Sometimes we have to sort of teach the bear a little bit and give it this aversive conditioning to make sure that they're behaving okay. And then we use a bunch of archaic tools and other things to make this all happen. I'm gonna fast forward as I'm running out of time. So yeah, scenes like this are pretty common, and how do we manage them? How do we coexist? How do we be in the same place at the same time and all safely benefit from it? And what the bears have taught us, all the science has taught us, is that we're often managing people and using these sort of structures like warnings and closures to identify where people are. But the other part of it, sorry, I'm going a little fast here, but is over the last 25 years, we understand this is sort of bear life tables, where bears are reproducing in the family trees, and we've become intimately familiar with these animals and who begat who and how they exist on the landscape. My friend Colleen Campbell has put together these family histories, which become life tables, which are biologically significant and help us understand bears better. So in summary, and we can talk about this more, it's a pretty cool phenomenon that's happening in Kananaskis country, where bears and people are currently kind of coexisting. And it's owing to a bunch of staff and volunteers and a bunch of other people who are contributing to this. That's it. I'll stop there.
Thank you, John. We're just waiting to pop over to Lucas. And if anybody has questions to ask John, we're just going to save them to the end of the session. And you can drop your questions into the Mentimeter.
Major events leading to policy change. We have Molly Seagal with her presentation on Bear 148. So let's give it up for Molly Seagal.
Hi, can everyone, I think people can see my screen.
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, great. So I'm Molly Seagal. I'm the host and producer of the Bear 148 podcast for the Narwhal. I'll just give you a little sense of what I do. I am an audio journalist. So I make stories for radio and podcasts like Bear 148. I specialize in stories about the environment and in particular how people relate to the non-human world, including how we relate to animals. And what I do includes research, talking to people, going out, recording with biologists like I am with this biologist in this photo. And then I have to compile all of that stuff and make sense of it and hopefully present it in a compelling way to share those stories. So I'm based in Banff, Alberta, and I moved here almost 6 years ago. And it was really the first time that I had lived so close to wildlife, but not just wildlife, the really big animals like grizzly bears. And I started to realize how many people around me were really obsessed with these animals. And I became interested in that dynamic, how these bears and other critters would make the local headlines like they were celebrities. Of course, living here, I had my own encounters with grizzly bears as well and became fascinated with them. One particularly memorable one was being out on the Bow River, a grizzly bear crossing, like ferrying across the river right in front of my canoe. So it's really remarkable to get to see them so up close, and they obviously captivate me as well. And so in about 2016, I started learning more about grizzly bears. I started reporting on them, spending time out in Banff with biologists, and also visiting other communities around Alberta and British Columbia. This photo was taken in Creston, British Columbia, with some biologists who were monitoring bears that were living near farmland. And so I started to also learn about the different ways people relate to grizzly bears depending on what type of community you're in. And also learning about the science, what we know, but also what scientists are still trying to figure out about grizzly bears. And so when it comes to grizzly bears, the one common theme is that they're contentious. Like anywhere you go, they seem to be contentious. And some of the ideas I've explored through my work look at that mix of fascination and fear surrounding not just grizzly bears, but really any animal that threatens us, or maybe more importantly, that we think threatens us or that we perceive to be threatening. And so when things started to unfold with Bear 148, I was already immersed in this world of humans and grizzly bears and sharing those stories. And I followed along with the news as it unfolded. I wasn't doing any of this reporting, but I have a bunch of the headlines up here in case you're not familiar with Bear 148's life. She was a bear that was born and born in Banff and lived her life in the Bow Valley. And as she started to have interactions with people, often with dogs, I noticed a bit of a pattern in the stories and how they were reported. And it just seemed to me that there was an element of the story that was missing. What it also highlighted was just how engaged people were with this bear's story. She was part of the community. People felt very close to her and attached to her. As a journalist, I see that it's my job to illuminate the facts. And somehow with this bear's life and death, all of the reporting didn't seem to amount to tell her full story. And so I saw an opportunity to create a podcast in order to go in depth about this bear's life and death and why she was so important to the community. She became a symbol of how our own perceptions of wild animals inform policies and actions, and that has such a big impact on these animals. And those rules usually change when they cross borders, not just the policies, but sometimes our attitudes, like what people are willing to accept or not accept. And really, this was the case with Bear 148. And through my reporting, I found that when it comes to grizzly bears, we, like us humans, are the biggest threat to their survival. And so whether that's our food and our garbage, or our roads or our trains, but it's also the rules that we make about what behavior we'll accept depending on where a bear is, and we expect these bears to follow that. So it's both on an individual level of someone's actions, but also on a structural level. And I do want to acknowledge that in the Bow Valley in particular, there's a lot being done for coexistence, wildlife overpasses, the crossings to let bears and other critters for that matter safely cross the highway, the bear-proof garbage bins, which when they're used correctly can be really effective. So it's obviously a very nuanced story, but simply put, I think that it's us people who tend to be the biggest challenge to the survival of grizzly bears, not just in the Bow Valley, but my reporting elsewhere has illuminated that this is the case pretty much everywhere that people and bears exist. And so I think the most interesting thing that's emerged for me as I've reported on Bear 148 and other grizzly bears over the years is just how individual they are. I've had the chance to spend a lot of time with biologists, and the thing I love the most is hearing their stories of the individual bears that they've observed and how different they are. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions at the end. And I hope that if you haven't already gotten the chance to listen to Bear 148, that you can tune in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. Once again, just drop that into the chat. The Mentimeter chat will drop that Mentimeter link in there if you haven't already received it. And over to Lucas.
Yes, thank you, Molly. That was a really very informative presentation. So, following this theme of not knowing the full story in regards to grizzly bears and how they operate, we're going to move on to Sarah El-Maligi with her look at how policy should reflect up-to-date science. So, without further ado, take it away, Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Are you looking at my title slide or my notes view?
Yes, we can see your title slide.
Okay, perfect. So I want to start by thanking you very much for inviting me to be part of this opening panel this morning. I really like all the work that CRYS does, and it's always really nice to be a part of that. I'm really humbled to be on this panel with some of the people that I most respect in my profession. I think for a lot of you, you probably don't know the other people on this panel, but I do, and they're all super amazing. And I think this is just a phenomenal panel to be a part of. So thanks again. The summary of what I'm talking about today could literally take days or months or years to fully describe. The complexity of grizzly bear science, management, and policy, and how those three things intersect is intense. So I'm gonna try to summarize some things and give you some examples, but please understand that there's a lot that goes into policy and management decisions when it comes to bears. Also, I just want to say that all of the photos in my presentation are those of John Marriott. John was my partner in our recently released book, What Bears Teach Us, and I just want to acknowledge that all of the amazing photos are his. So there was a time when people wrongly assumed that humans were the only beings capable of complex thought, decision-making, and learning. And some people still believe that animals operate mainly on instinct. But recent research over the past several decades has really started to show the complexity of how bears learn and use the landscape. Every moment of every day, a bear makes decisions based on its learning of the present circumstances and its estimation of what may happen next. The ability to learn is associated with its large brain size, well-developed memory, and its curiosity. This is important to understand because our management responses to bears must also learn over time because bears are learning over time. As science tells us more details about how bears select habitat and how they navigate an increasingly human-dominated landscape, our policy and management responses should change to incorporate the best scientific evidence and recommendations. But whenever I think about bear management, I kind of come back to what John and Molly have been saying too, is this quote from one of my master's supervisors, that wildlife management is usually just as much people management. When I first became a bear biologist, I thought I'd be working with bears exclusively, but I was so wrong about that. If we are going to effectively manage for human-bear coexistence, we need to consider that we will in effect be managing people. Rarely do we manage bears directly. Even though we mostly manage people, it is still important to understand how bears learn to do what they do. This helps us understand the motivation behind certain bear behaviors, which can help us target management solutions at the cause of the behavior. For example, bears who learn that human areas are food rich, like they're getting into garbages or fruit trees or whatever, they may become dependent on those food sources and then become at risk to human safety. The root cause of the problem is the human provision of food. So if that food source can be removed, then we can reduce that safety risk over the long term. That's managing people. You can't stop a bear from eating crab apples out of a crabapple tree, but you can change whether or not a crabapple tree is growing in somebody's front yard. Bears spend the first few years of their lives learning as much as possible from their mother. For these first years, they're with her 24/7, watching her, mimicking her, and absorbing all that she has to teach. Most lessons focus on what to eat, where and when to find it, and how to stay safe. These years are essential for social learning. From a scientific perspective, this is what some of that learning might look like. So this is a map of grizzly bear home ranges in Banff National Park. This data is several years old. But this helps us as scientists and managers understand what are the core areas of the landscape that bears need to use during the different seasons. Grizzly bears will have this mind map of their home range, and they'll understand where the best berry patches are, where the best fishing spots are. And they absorb these important lessons from their mother. And the better they are at that learning, the more they get to eat, the more weight they gain, and the healthier they are going into hibernation. And bears will base their movements across the landscape on this internal understanding of their home range. Combining what we know about how bears learn and how they use the landscape with human disturbance and conflict data, we can really start to implement management actions that target specific behaviors and move us closer to coexistence. So this is a picture of the fence on either side of the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff National Park, which was designed to keep bears on one side of the fence to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions. And that has definitely worked, but it also has created this situation where people feel like they can get really close to a bear with a fence in between and that's safe, but that leads to bears becoming habituated and that can increase their risk of mortality elsewhere. Bears incorporate roads and human use trails in their mind map to understand where human activity is more prevalent and how to avoid it. The couple people have mentioned the crossing structures in Banff National Park. So these crossing structures become part of the bear's mind map, and they learn that they can cross the Trans-Canada Highway safely by using one of these overpasses. These are shining examples of how science is informed where the crossing structures might best be located and how managers work with a variety of stakeholders, transportation, engineers, other biologists, local communities to make these crossing structures happen. And policy is what gives this group of people the direction to move it forward. Policy is informed by public opinion and public desire, so the public is actually engaged in all of that as well. One of the things we've learned from science is the need for human use to be predictable. Bears, in their mind map of their home range, they want to know where the people are, what they're doing, and when they're doing that, so that they can choose whether or not to be around people. That's really important to moving towards coexistence. John mentioned the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan, and this is the policy in Alberta that guides management direction and guides grizzly bear recovery through the province. Documents like this are open for public input when they're in their draft form. And so it's important, if people care about grizzly bears, that they can provide comments to the development of a plan like this. The recovery plan defines recovery goals and management actions. And I have a question mark behind recovery goals there because I think it's important for us to recognize that a grizzly bear recovery goal is not necessarily a population number on the landscape. It may be that, but it could also be a goal around coexistence. How do we coexist with grizzly bears on the landscape in Alberta? And how do we treat our communities, and how do our communities treat grizzly bears? Because really, when it comes to coexistence, it works best when we work together. And that's us working together as a community or us working together with bears. One of the things that I love most about working with bears is that nobody is powerless. We all have the power to coexist. So the choices that we make on the landscape in terms of how we live, where we recreate, and how we work in bear habitat, all of those choices can be part of the solution to recover grizzly bears in Alberta. And I've gone a little over time, I apologize. But that's all I have. So I look forward to the discussion. Thanks so much.
Alex? Alex?
Am I going to dive right in, or is Lucas going to jump in?
Give me 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Just a friendly reminder that if you guys want to ask a question to our panelists, or if you want to vote on a question you'd like to have asked, be sure to check out the Mentimeter link. Sorry?
Does Lucas want to jump on just on his laptop?
I think we can just start with Nick.
Hello?
Now.
Yeah.
From...
Sorry, technical difficulties. Thank you, Sarah. Finally, we have Nick de Ruyter. He'll be talking about how you can be an ambassador for coexistence in your own life and your own community. And if you have any questions, be sure to check out the Mentimeter poll and be sure to vote for the question you'd like to have asked the most. Without further ado, let's let Nick take it away.
Oh my.
Okay, well, thank you. Can everyone hear me right now?
Yes, we can hear you, Nick. Thank you. So Nick de Ruyter from WildSmart, part of the Biosphere programs.
And do you see my big screen or my presenter notes?
I see everything, no presenter notes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for letting me speak with everyone today. It's great to be here, and I'm just going to follow up on some of those things that that everyone has talked about, but specifically also Sarah. So there are things we can do ourselves, simple things. Some are a bit harder. Some are the right thing to do, even though we might not always want to do them. But we certainly can be good neighbors and coexist with grizzly bears. So some of the easy stuff. Now, some of you might know this, some of you might not know this, but things like knowing before you go. So educating yourself before you even leave the house. That could be signing up for our bear report to see what bears are eating and where they are at certain times of the year. It could be checking trail warnings and closures before you leave the house. You know, buying bear spray, knowing how to use it. We've got great videos on our website to watch about how to use bear spray. So those are all things you can do before you even leave the house. And when you're out on the trail, just simple things like making lots of noise. And you know, even though talking is good, you need to make louder noise. So a good "ayo" is what I teach my kids and what I do, just so you don't surprise wildlife and you can give them time to move off the trail. It sounds like a simple thing, and it is, but it's very effective. Other things is traveling in groups. I see people going out hiking by themselves a lot or in groups of 2, but if you go in groups of 4 or more, you greatly reduce the risk or chance of an encounter. In a group, you're not only more intimidating, but you're also making more noise automatically. So that's just another simple thing you can do to stay safer. No earbuds or headphones. I'm wearing mine now, but not when I'm outdoors. You want to be able to listen for sounds of wildlife. Wildlife are actually pretty fair to us. They normally give us plenty of warning signs if we're too close or if they need space. So let's keep those earbuds out so we can hear what's going on around us. You know, keeping dogs on a leash is also very important. It's safer for you, for your dog, for the wildlife, and for other people around you. Stay out of closed area. Those areas are closed for a reason, to keep you safe, to keep wildlife safe, and to give them space. And when you're out there, carry bear spray now responsibly. Most of you are probably on this call are too young to buy bear spray, but certainly you're allowed to carry it if your parents deem you responsible enough. But it's a privilege, not a right. Don't be silly with it. Use it for its purpose. Some other things, you know, we saw this last year, you know, garbage was a huge problem. We want to make sure you pack out what you pack in. That includes human waste, toilet paper, diapers, you know, and if a garbage bin is full, take it home with you. If you're camping or going for a picnic, you know, you want to make sure you never leave any food unattended. See that nice top picture there, a nice clean campsite. No food is left unattended. And that bottom picture, we don't want to leave our coolers and our garbage and food laying out on the table, because that's just setting those animals up for disaster. You know, we never want to feed any wildlife. Doesn't matter if it's a squirrel or a grizzly bear or a wolf. Never feed any wildlife. I'm leaving it as that. There's nothing more to say. For grizzly bears, if they start getting food conditioned and getting used to eating human food, the end result is normally very bad for the bear, normally either relocation or death. So never feed any wildlife. This picture was from last year. It's busy out there, so make sure you have a backup plan. Maybe your first or second choice of wherever you're going might be full, or the parking lot might be full, so have backup plans. And just note, there is a chance you might get ticketed. They're going to be stricter with parking when you're out there, so have backup plans for sure. You know, the right stuff. Okay, following the best practice is important. Sometimes that could be even if it's not the law, there's the right thing to do. And I put up this picture of this seasonal trail restriction in Lake Minnewanka, because during certain times of the year, you have to, if you want to use the trail, go in a group of 4 or more, carry bear spray, stay close together. You're not allowed to bring a dog. Those are all those things that can keep you safer as well as the wildlife safe. So going that extra mile can be very effective in keeping you safe. You know, never take selfies or videos close to wildlife for your TikTok videos. It's not fair to stress out a bear or other animal just for your social media gain. Try to leave your speakers at home. Out on the trail, it's definitely a pet peeve of mine when people have loud music playing. Sure, you are playing music, but at what cost? You're distracting other people. It's a bit annoying for other people. It's a bit selfish, and it's probably not loud enough to scare a bear off the trail. AO works a lot better. And lead by example. This is a very important thing for you to do as well, because don't use the excuse, oh, but everyone else is doing it, you know. And maybe I'm preaching to the choir to everyone here, because I feel like people attending really try to do the right thing, but try to follow the rules, even if other people aren't. And some of the harder stuff, you know, you can all be an ambassador for wildlife. And you all have the power. The youth voice does matter, and and people do listen, and it can be very powerful. I love it when I teach young kids, and then they go home and they basically tell off their parents for not keeping their dog on leash, or for not carrying bear spray. So it's good for you to go out there and have conversations with people. Don't hesitate to educate people out on the trail, your peers. And the key thing there is have good conversations, not confrontations. You don't want to point fingers or make people feel bad. You want to see if they can, or make them feel like they're part of the solution. And another thing is knowing how to handle encounters. That's a tricky one, and we can talk about that more in the question and answer if anyone has any questions on that. But these are some of the key things that you can do, some easier than others, to be a good neighbor and coexist with grizzly bears. And thank you very much.
We're ready. Thank you, Nick. With that, we are ready to start our Q&A. I'll be asking questions from our Mentimeter to some of our panelists, and they'll do their best to answer them. So, our first question here is directed to all panelists. The question is, how many kilometers do bears walk in a year?
Movement in terms of the kilometers per year, but we'll talk about home range sizes. And the way it works is the more, or the better the food, the less bears move. So if there's really good food or a salmon stream or something like that, the bears don't have to move far to get food. If they're in a poor landscape, like up in the Arctic tundra, they might move thousands of square kilometers. And around here, we'll see females have home ranges as small as 80, 90 square kilometers for a year. Males will be like 2,500 at the large size, but it depends on food and a bunch of other social things.
I would say probably, if I had to guess a number, probably several thousand kilometers in a year. Not always traveling over long distances, but traveling along these bear lines. Usually there's a big square in a given area where bears usually track throughout a given period of time, day or days in a week. So they're basically like on a little patrol. And when they go into these areas, they're covering several hundred meters in a day. So it all varies, but I would if I had to guess, probably somewhere around a couple thousand kilometers in a year.
Yeah, I'll also build on this array of knowledge coming forward that the amount that bears are moving changes with the seasons, because as John said, they're following, most of the time they're following the availability of food resources. So when food resources are concentrated, then they won't move as much. So, you know, you can have a grizzly bear hanging out, and if it's a really good berry patch, like the ones that we have in South Canmore, they can spend a whole entire week and move, you know, maybe a few hundred meters. But if they have to walk really far to get to a better berry patch, then they'll cover that distance in a very short period of time. So their movement is entirely, well, not entirely, like Bill said, they're doing this like big patrol on the year, going through their whole home range, their whole landscape. But day to day, their movement is really just depending on where the best food is. And we do also know that areas of high human use, so like communities, highways, railways, in that movement, bears are also incorporating how to avoid people at the same time. So they might have greater movement rates when they are around communities than if they're just out in the bush and there's nothing there.
Awesome. Those are great answers. All right. Our next question is directed towards John specifically. Is there a specific area within the Rocky Mountains that bears are more common, and if so, why?
Again, it's all tied to food. So if there's more food there, there's going to be a higher probability of bears being in a certain spot. Bears live and die by calories. That said, anytime you step off the pavement or out of your car or off your bike and head into the wild areas, you can expect bear encounters. They're everywhere. There's no predictive model I can say there's no bears here today. Expect them everywhere.
All right. Our next question is directed to Bill Snow. What is the significance of the rare white grizzly bear for the Stoney Nakoda people?
The cultural significance is that it's because having an all-white wildlife like that is unique. It's different. We don't see it very often.
Yep.
Culturally, it's significant because in many cases, my example will be like white buffalo. White buffaloes are also very rare in nature. Buffaloes are also culturally significant to the Stoney people. We see or we view these wildlife as caretakers of the land, caretakers of medicine, and their cultural significance is that they sometimes appear to us in dreams or give us messages through our spiritual cultural activities. And so we know not to bother or to trouble that particular species. We know to respect it, to keep our distance, and to not interfere with the life and the work that bear is doing. It's special to see, but it's there for a reason. Like, for example, when the white grizzly bear came out to the Banff area, what we call that place we call that place, well, it's known for all of the spiritual waters in the Banff area, the waterfalls that come off of Cascade Mountain. Those are spiritually important places. The hot waters at the springs on Sulphur Mountain, very spiritually important. The waters at Caven Basin, all spiritually important. So in a way, it is important that that bear be in that place because it's surrounded by all of these spiritually important waters. Menerpa is what we call the Banff area because of those waterfalls that come off of Cascade. So it's important that that bear was in that area because it's a spiritually important area. So culturally important because not only because it's there, because it's sort of tending to that ground in that place within the Banff area. Menerpa.
Thank you, Bill. All right. Our next question here is for Molly. What do you think is the biggest thing we can do to avoid another Bear 148 situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that really came through in my interviews with wildlife biologists and experts when I was producing the podcast was how important it is to walk your dog on a leash, respect the rules that have been put in place. I know this sounds really, really basic, like read the signs. It sounds basic, but I think if we each collectively do these things like put your garbage away, respect distance, bring your bear spray, like collectively, it can make a difference. I think that's probably the best way to avoid it. I think, unfortunately, I think the nature of how close people are to wildlife in the Bow Valley, I think there's always going to be a degree of, I guess, what's referred to as conflict. It may not always look like Bear 148, but when a bear gets hit by a car, that's also a human-caused death, right? So it may not be the high profile as Bear 148, but I think it's going to be an existing thing in the Bow Valley for foreseeable future.
Thank you, Molly. All right. Our next question will be to everyone. What are the biggest threats to grizzly bears in wild spaces, and what can individuals do to reduce these threats?
I can start. I think one of the biggest threats is connectivity. So when we have developments like highways, transportation corridors, any types of infrastructure across the landscape, and then we do not provide easy access for wildlife, not just grizzly bears, but bighorn sheep, elk, deer, moose, all the other ungulates and rodents, all of those wildlife that have an impact on the landscape. Not providing that access, whether it be through towns or villages or through even highways, high-use traffic areas. When we don't provide connectivity, I think we all understand confinement from COVID-19. Now, imagine that for wildlife, telling them we're trying to keep them in one area. So not providing connectivity for wildlife over these structures that have been built in their culturally and environmentally important landscapes. To me, that's the biggest issue right now, is that we have good connectivity in Banff National Park, but otherwise in other places in southern Alberta, we do not have great connectivity. You don't see very many wildlife overpasses, underpasses. So to me, that's a problem.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna follow up. Sarah, were you about to go?
I'll go after you, Nick.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short. Yeah, and just following up, I agree, Bill, with that for sure. And for me, it's also just people, and like Sarah said, wildlife management is more about people management. And you can give a range. So, for example, Bill was talking about the Nakota, the white grizzly bear. There's cultural significance, but for a lot of people, they're like, sweet, a white bear. We're going to drive out to Banff, get as close as we can, try and get pictures, try and get that selfie, Instagram, all that stuff, without even one thought about how it's affecting the bear itself. That's one side of things, and that's just social media and pictures and videos. And then you also go to looking at recreation and look at how during COVID, it's gotten so much busier at all hours of the day out on the trails. And as Sarah mentioned as well, talking about predictability, for wildlife, they need to know where they can be without being harassed, and if us humans, if we're out recreating in different areas, doing different activities at different elevation levels at all hours of the day, it's really confusing for wildlife to know where to go without running into people. And it's almost impossible. There's backcountry skiers and there's e-bikers and mountain bikers and trail runners and this and that. So there's so much human use that it's really hard for wildlife to adapt properly, because even now, even at night, people are out on the trails all the time. So those are just two kind of different examples of how people are affecting grizzly bears and other wildlife. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I think I think Bill and Nick have kind of hit on the two main issues that I see. The biggest one, I think, for me is the ever expanding human footprint that we have on the landscape. So whether that human footprint is happening in terms of like actual development, like industrial development or community development or whatever, or if that expanding human footprint is our recreational footprint, we are going further and further into grizzly bear habitat every day. There's more and more people going further and further and deeper into grizzly bear habitat all the time, which is basically just reducing the amount of true wilderness, if you want to call it that, or spaces where grizzly bears can live on the landscape without running into people. And that is a huge threat, because that reduces our predictability on the landscape, but it also reduces the available high quality habitat for bears, especially those bears that don't want to be around people.
And if I can add just one more thing, these changes, these losses of connectivity that Bill spoke of, and the recreational impacts and the habitat loss, they don't happen in one fell swoop. Like it happens incrementally, unnoticeably over long periods of time, and you really have to think ahead to get ahead of those, avoiding those types of problems, which is a challenge.
One last question. So the last question for all the panelists today is, what is a proper and safe way to react if you see a bear?
I can take this one away, and I've actually got I got something prepared just for something like this. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Oops, so I'm having some technical difficulties here. Is this working? Do you guys see?
Yep.
Do you guys see this?
Yes, we can see
that. Okay, sorry. I was just going to quickly run this. So I've got 3 words for you: stop, talk, and walk. And that's easy to remember, similar to stop, drop, and roll. So if you're out there and you encounter any kind of wildlife, first thing you do is you stop. You never run away from wildlife. You want to gather your group together, stay calm, and have your bear spray ready, because everyone should be carrying bear spray with them, right? Next thing you can do is talk in a calm voice. Don't shout. Doesn't matter what language you speak, just talk to the animal. Let them know you're a human, let them know you're not a threat, and maybe talk to your group and tell them what to do, and stay calm. It's in our DNA to run away, but we need to try and overpower our body and just stay calm and not run. And the third one is walk. We never want to run away. We want to back away slowly with our group, always keeping an eye on the animal, but we never want to turn around and run or walk away. So back away slowly and have your bear spray ready just in case. And I want to just show this one. It's a very, very short clip. Some of you may have seen it before, but I feel like this encompasses a really good way of handling an encounter.
Stay there, Barry. Don't follow us. Don't come towards us. I don't want to use my bear spray. That's a good boy.
Good boy.
That's a good boy. Crap, he's huge.
That's good.
Okay, come forward.
We're not
Forward.
gonna hurt you.
No, come forward. That's it. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
He's gonna come this way.
Keep going. That's a good boy. That's a good boy. Keep going. That's a good boy. Look at you go. Crap, he's huge.
See, so it is possible to stay calm and talk to the animal in a calm voice just like that. It is doable. I don't recommend videotaping encounters with wildlife, but it's a good learning opportunity.
Nick, can I jump in and ask a question?
Yes.
You've talked about calm voice, but I've been out in the field with biologists when we've seen a bear very far away, and they're really projecting their voices. And I'm wondering, is there sort of a rule of, is there a principle to follow when, like, you know, how close would you want to be speaking quietly versus like how far away might you want to be yelling to avoid the bear even getting to you in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good, I don't think there's an exact science, but the loud yelling at a distance would be similar to the adversive conditioning stuff that John was talking about. So when the bear is far away, you just want to scare it away so that it moves off the trail. It'd be like some people have air horns or bear bangers or things like that. Whereas up close, if you were to, you know, in a surprise encounter or something, all of a sudden start yelling, that might seem more threatening at a close range. So then you'd want to act a little bit more calm. Now, it's not an exact science. Every encounter is unique, but that's the way I would interpret that one. And John, if you want to jump in, go right ahead.
Yeah, no, it is very situational. Like if there's a bear 300 meters away and you can get by it without notifying it, by all means, just stay quiet and go by. But in general, make noise and don't have the surprise encounter. That's what you're trying to avoid.
I think one of the main messages that we'd like to get across to all the youth is that even though we have experienced people that have been in and around or working in wilderness environments for many years, every encounter is different. Every encounter is new. And so just the tips and the advice that Nick has shared with the youth, I think is really important, because if we're distracted or we take our attention away by electronic devices, that can really be a detriment. So understanding those risks and understanding those following those rules around tips and being in a different type of environment, I think is important for youth to understand that it's not the same as walking in a city park or walking in an urban environment or a agricultural rural environment. When we're in wildlife environments, it's very much a different way of that we have to carry ourselves.
All right. Well, we've just about run out of time, so I'd like to thank all the panelists for taking time out of their day to do this. You guys were awesome. I'd also like to thank all of you for bearing with us through technical difficulties. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for speaking. This was a great panel. We're going to take a 15-minute break, or we'll reconvene at 10:15. So get up, get some water, get a snack. We'll be back here for an interesting little activity. So see you then.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good summit.
Thanks all. Good job, Lucas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good summit.
Thank you, guys.